welcome to the Drawing Room Experts. This is Zaib, back with another episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and follow the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, and wherever you're listening. And do leave us a rating. It really helps people discover the show. And share with us your opinions as well to whatever I blabber every now and then. Today's episode is an interesting one because I've been thinking about doing this for a long time, and through different contexts I didn't really get the chance to express that opinion of mine, but I think through the current context, I think it makes more sense to really explore this idea, explore this topic at a detail, not in a detail, but at a length that I feel like would be appropriate. One disclaimer that I want to give, I think early on, right away, right off the bat, is that I don't, like all the different podcasts that I have, different discussions that I try and bring to the foray. This is not, the most educated, the most well-known, well thought out, opinion out there on this current, on the current topic. But what it is in actuality is a series of well thought out questions or opinions, how well educated or how well defined they are. I mean, that I'll let you be the judge of that, but at the very least, what they are comments, questions, concerns, opinions coming from a well-meaning place. So, I mean, I wanted to give that disclaimer because people assume the fact that this podcast is called the Drawing Room Experts. I'm kind of like an expert on on any topic. I mean, the word play on Drawing Room Expert is supposed to be the fact that it's not the most well educated opinions, but at the very least, what it is an opinion that is worth sharing. So with that being said, I think let's get started. I think and I'll be looking down. I mean, I've just made some quick notes so that I understand the points that I wanted to make, and I really address them, cover them as much as possible. So with the current situation in Iran, relating to the death, the murder, however you want to call it, of MahsaAmini, a local who was captured or arrested by the quote-unquote morality police, and then as a result of that, they were, she was killed, or she died in custody. So I've done a lot of thinking about it. I've heard from a lot of people and try to listen and gauge what they think and how I should be forming an opinion, as well thought out or well educated as I can. But at the very least, what I've realized is that it's another one of those instances where, jahan pe we try and really dumb down things to really, so that we can avoid thinking about it. I think it stems from laziness. It stems from trying to feel better fast, faster gratification, especially happens in the West, especially happens with the left in the West, where they just want to speak on an issue from a moral high standpoint, and speak on it really fast because it just serves their purpose, and it serves their mood, and serves the fact that they want to feel really good about it. I think, and no one's willing to have a deeper discussion. I mean, there are very important points that come out of this discussion, I feel like, and that, I may not be best suited to answer them. I may not be able to answer them. I may not have those answers in this podcast, but it's definitely something that I want to explore down the line with some of the other people that I want to bring on for an episode or two. But I think at the heart of it, what I feel like what's happening in Iran is stemming from a few things. I mean, let's get I want to understand that there are like three or four aspects of this whole discussion that deserve each and every one of them to be looked at individually, in isolation, in context. The first is the religious aspect. Obviously, with the debates well and truly centered around a woman's right or a woman's requirement to cover herself up. So obviously, there's a religious aspect around that, around the whole hijab debate, about the whole covering oneself. And then as an extension to that, I think it also has a lot to do with morality and how it's linked with how a woman dresses. That's a larger debate, not necessarily religious per se on face value, but a lot of the religious wisdom comes from or stems from that. So it's not a debate worth ignoring, in my opinion. The other aspect, again, could be linked with the religious aspect, but is still an aspect that requires to be looked at individually outside of the whole hodgepodge of news that you see and hear. Is the social aspect, right? So a lot of these situations, a lot of the when we talk about laws, when we talk about moralities, when we talk about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, a lot of that has to do with the social climate, with the social parameters in which that discussion is taking place. The third and a little bland aspect, in my opinion, is the legal aspect of it. I mean, legal aspect as in the the enforcement part, where we're talking about morality policing. We're talking about what's happening in custody, if these people are being treated unjustly and whatnot. So that's one aspect, and the last but not the least definitely is the coverage, the media aspect of it, which I feel like it's a fairly easy aspect to tackle, because I think for the most part, if you've been listening to the podcast for a good part of 105-106 episodes so far, you would know how I feel about the media in general, and how it really presents itself in does not cover itself with a lot of glory for the most part. But I think those are the four aspects I feel like this whole topic deserves further dissection. I mean, just starting out with the religious aspect of it. I mean, and this could be addressed to two sets of people, one being the Muslims, one and the others being non-Muslims. To the Muslims who, when I say Muslims, adhere, and if not adhere, but at least recognize that covering, oneself up has a morality context behind it, has morals connected to it. People on both sides of the argument, both sides, when I say pro-Iran or anti-Iran, can be people who are Muslims. So an important difference that we really need to start understanding here, as far as the religious aspect is concerned, that at least to the Muslims, I would say that we are definitely not having a debate around reinterpreting moral practices in the religion. Or are we saying that this didn't exist? This is something that was, thousands of years ago was brought up, and it's just a cultural issue. It's not a religious issue. I think as far as the religious aspect of this is concerned, I think it's very clear and it's very simple that, at least with the Muslims, that this is not a debate per se. This is not an item of discussion where we are debating the legitimacy of covering oneself up. And when I say covering oneself up, I mean, I know could be heard out as, this could be perceived as that I'm linking all moralities to one species, one gender, and that is definitely not the case. That is definitely not my intention. I feel like that it's a very generic, again, a very lazy argument people bring up when they say, okay, why should one cover themselves up, is because it reduces the amount of sex crimes in the society. I think that's a very bland and a very lazy way to approach it, but that's my opinion, and we can talk about that at another time. But what I wanted to really say here, as far as religious argument is concerned, as far as religious aspect of this whole debate in and outside Iran is concerned, is that, at least with the Muslims, there shouldn't be any two ways about whether this is a legitimate thing, whether covering oneself up is a legitimate thing or not. I think it is. So that's why I feel like there's no particular debate on that front. And even if there is, I think I wouldn't consider them religiously Muslims. I would consider them socially Muslims. Socially Muslims, I mean, the definition is that once they recognize themselves as Muslims, but they don't really adhere to the values that the religion brings forward. For example, alcohol, or a number of things that are socially accepted to them, which may go against the religious values. So I feel like that's one aspect where there's not much debate to be had in terms of like whether this is a real thing or not, because it definitely is. The other thing is, as far as the religious aspect is concerned, is to the non-Muslims. So from the non-Muslim standpoint, I understand and I get why they would be up in arms about this, because to them the whole premise of covering oneself up is something that they just don't they don't subscribe to, or they don't understand, or they don't have it's just something very alien to them. So for them to criticize that, the whole principle of covering oneself up, I understand. And I what I would say to them is that if it's a ruling, which a lot of Muslims will argue that it is, then the non-Muslim aspect of this religious, non-Muslim fraction of this religious aspect should try and understand the wisdom behind the ruling. And if after that they are not able to really make up their mind, or still probably saying that this is a very ridiculous notion that is brought forward by this religion, then that's their opinion. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is social. So I put this separately, and I thought about this separately from religious, because a lot of people, what happens is that even in Pakistan, given my experiences in the Muslim communities in Pakistan, Shia communities in Pakistan specifically, they do a really bad job of mixing these two, religion and society or social practices, and a criticism of one is misconstrued to be a criticism of the other. So if you're criticizing a cultural thing, some people misconstrue that as to the criticism of the religion, which is, I feel like, a very naive and a very ridiculous argument to make, because those two things it couldn't be more separate. But at the very least, I think even if we discount the religious aspect of it, I think it's worth noting and it's worth reviewing if you're, an independent reviewer, and if you're an independent free thinker outside of the boxes that we've created ourselves, um, um, created for ourselves, it'll be worth noting to understand if what the society accepts as normal, and whether does that differ from one region or one place or one country to another. And I'll give you an example. I mean, a very common and a very simple example to make is when I first moved from Pakistan here to the US. I think one of the things that um, weren't really new, but I knew about them, watching them through the lens of the American media, is living with your parents is considered a sign of laziness, a sign of someone who has failed to grow up, someone who has failed to really accept adolescence, someone who has failed to really make anything for themselves here in the US. That's how it's perceived when you say that you're living with your parents. In Pakistan, it's not. It's hardly a thing that is even challenged. Living with your parents is a very normal thing in Pakistan, and I mean, even in that region, for that matter, India, Bangladesh. So the what's socially acceptable in certain regions may not be socially acceptable in other regions, and that doesn't make one better than the other. So I just fail to understand when people try and really bring their judgments to about the fact that how certain things happen in their culture, and how they're superior to the others. I mean, sticking with the example of living with one's parents is considered a very abnormal and laughable offense, quote unquote, here in the West, but it's not at all. I mean, if anything, it's considered like borderline offensive, if parents are not there living with you, if parents are living alone, or if it's considered like, why is that the case? Why aren't they living with their son or their children? So the social aspect of this whole debate around covering oneself up, morality, is a very important aspect to really understand and really dive into and see if that's how societies govern themselves. What's right in Japan, socially acceptable in Japan, may not be socially acceptable in the United States or in Europe, and vice versa. So there's always that subjectivity around what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. That's why I feel like there has to be one source of truth through which we can dissect and really cut through the bullshit and talk about what's the ultimate truth and the ultimate reality and the ultimate way of doing things and the ultimate morality and ethical value. So the social aspect, I feel like, is again something that is glossed over and completely ignored, disrespectfully in my opinion, because I feel like again, if it doesn't serve a certain narrative, it means nothing to them. What if the society as a whole, like, how does, I think another good thing that comes out of this particular aspect is, especially for people who are not really inclined towards having religious viewpoints governing them. What would you rather have? What would you have societies do when they need to govern themselves, or when they need to create what's acceptable and norms and do's and don'ts? What's the good way? What's a good way of doing that? And I have no option but to think that the answer would be democracy. The answer would be what's acceptable by the largest communities or largest portion of a community. That should drive what should be socially acceptable. And I mean, if one person says this is acceptable, the other person says that's not acceptable, who should win that debate? It's the people. It's the person who has most people on their side, right? It's quite simple. So for that to be the case, what if a large section of society considers covering themselves up to be morally righteous, or the morally right thing to do? How would you then approach that? I think that would leave you in a very difficult conundrum, right? Because you are all for democratic principles, you're all for societies ruling and commanding themselves. And if that were to be the case in this instance, would it then not really go against the principle of like, this is not acceptable, therefore, we should, this is not acceptable, so we shouldn't do it. So if in that instance, if that's the case in Iran, where a large, and I'm not sure that that's the case, that's why, I mean, it's not an educated opinion. I've never lived there. I've never even gone there. I would love to go and visit and speak to a lot of people over there to really figure out how well-meaning, some of these opinions are. But at the very least, I think it's very imperative and it's very important to understand if the large majority, the vast majority of Iran does not approve of a certain way of life. Because it's definitely not the case of a coup where, someone armed coup where they just took over large portions of the community, and now they're like kind of like held to their viewpoint on the butt of a gun. So that's definitely not the case. Again, people might disagree with that, but that's, facts kind of like point towards what I'm suggesting is the truth. So, in order to make a judgment on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, it's very important to understand the social aspect of it. I mean, is it socially acceptable? If it is, then, everything else kind of like takes the back seat, because if democracy is set to be the founding principle, then that should really be it, right? The other aspect is the legal aspect. Again, like I said, I mean, this is linked to the first two aspects because it's just the enforcement of the first two aspects. So if a society feels dressing in a certain way is the right way to dress, and that's the moral way to dress, then if someone enforces that, should that be frowned upon? Now, when I say enforces, I'm definitely not talking about physical violence. I'm not talking about someone like MahsaAmini dying in captivity or in custody. That is the most extreme case, that one can have. But I'm talking about, enforcement of those laws. I mean, do we not have in the West where there's indecency laws, which, through which if you walk around naked on the streets now, police will come and give you a fine or charge you based on that law. Oh, and why is that the case? If you really dig deep and this is the most advanced and the most liberal states, in the world, and California is what I'm referring to. There are indecency laws over here. The difference is that their indecency starts at a different line. So the line that they've drawn is further down the road, as opposed to some of the other states, other countries, even they've drawn that line earlier. So the debate in actuality is where that line is drawn. It's not the fact that the line is drawn full stop, because that shouldn't be an argument in my opinion, because everyone's drawing a line somewhere. Where should the line be drawn? Which one's the right line? Let's have a discussion around that, as opposed to saying that there's no line anywhere, only one side has this social contract line whereby you cannot dress outside of a certain way in social settings. So enforcement, is the legal enforcement of the matter, and should one could say that they have morality policing, and the other could say the normal police force could do that. So, for example, if you walk around naked, inappropriately dressed on the streets right now in front of a school, let's say, you're not going to have like a moral police equivalent coming to arrest you. It would be the normal police that really governs, the security of people on the street. So, is that what it is? I mean, is suggesting that moral police is something really odd? I'm sure it sounds really weird when you put it that way, but isn't moral policing already happening in most, if not all, states in the world? Is again a question to be asked. Again, not providing the answers here. Perhaps I am. Perhaps I'm indicating towards them, but definitely not. I'm just raising some questions, food for thought. So enforcement, obviously I've made that caveat about MahsaAmini in that particular instance. Completely disagree with the force that is used, or the extent of the force that it is used to really clamp down, quote unquote, on immoralities on the streets. That's not the way, in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure in any sane person's opinion that wouldn't be the way. Last but not the least, the media handling of it. I think media handling of it has been so one-dimensional and has been so has had such a lack of understanding, such a lack of depth. It's all about trying to get that instant gratification of feeling, that instant high of feeling good about oneself. I think that's what everyone's looking for, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's the left or the right here in the United States, whether they want to bash Iran or want to bash any other country in the world who is doing something weird. I mean, we're just going through what they like. We're just seeing what they did with the World Cup and the moral conundrums that surrounded the tournament itself. So I think जितना उसके बारे में कम कहा जाए उतना ही बेहतर. I think it's not really worth shedding any light on, because it's just not intellectually honest. So the how media is handling this is just expected. It's expected that obviously one side good, one side bad. So jo bad side hogi, that'll get the bashing. So that's the name of the game. So no surprises there. And then also, I think what I'm really interested in when people kind of start quoting these media outlets is I try and understand, not just the rationale, but the intentions behind certain things that are brought up. Is there malice behind them? You be the judge of that. Does it serve countries, states, people better to throw certain shades at a country? Does it serve someone like CNN, Fox News, to have a debate where they cover these four aspects and talk about rationality, talk about trying to understand this whole conundrum and trying to match that with the moral policing that happens in every other state to one extent or the other? No, that doesn't serve any purpose. So why should they have that debate? So for them, it's very one-dimensional, it's very gung-ho, and then people using that, I feel like, slightly more to be blamed with, and because of their gullibility and because of their naivete. They should know better. They should know better, and no one better than me, someone coming from Pakistan, knows that how media kind of, is not the friend of the masses. It's the enemy in most cases, and especially in the US, when you've seen wars being fought on complete and utter falsehoods and lies, for the same media to then start teaching moral lessons and getting up on that high horse is ridiculous. So it's not even worth engaging with. Though yeah, I mean, it's in conclusion, I think what I would say in all of these four aspects, there's an answer to that. There's an answer to all of these four aspects. There's a debate or a discussion to be had in all of these four buckets. Where that discussion goes is completely dependent on one's worldview. What I would say is that when there are multiple worldviews, when there are multiple moralities, and when there are multiple values to review, I mean, it's just scientifically impossible to think that all of them are right. All of them could be wrong, but not certainly all of them could be right. There has to be something that's right. There's nothing that can be. There's no right on, right? I keep saying right so many times. Never mind. But एक तो सच होगा, एक तो सही होगा. अब वो सही क्या है? That's the point, right? That's what I try to hold myself to, is कि उस सच्चाई की तरफ, उस सच की तरफ बढ़े. Try and contemplate on issues like these in a very academic, objective manner, and then reach a conclusion. So when it comes to, in my opinion, when it comes to multiple viewpoints on moralities and multiple viewpoints on ethical values and all of that, all of that stuff, it points in one direction for me. It means that there has to be one source of truth through which will tell what's right and what's wrong, because what's right now, what's right decided by the people right now may not be right 50 years down the line. So if it isn't, then it means that if truth becomes subjective, then that's not the truth. Yeah, and that's what I'll leave you with. If truth is subjective, then there's a good chance, very, very good chance, that it's not the truth. Don't forget to subscribe the channel on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify. Leave us a rating on all these platforms, especially Apple and Spotify. And yeah, let me know what you think. Back to the